The thick oak door of the second-floor study trembled as Anthony Moretti slammed his fist against the desk, the crystal whiskey glass beside him shattering into 100 jagged pieces. His voice tore through the phone like a blade. "I need someone who can read this damn music sheet in 6 hours, or my daughter dies tonight. Do you hear me? 6 hours." On the other end of the line, silence. Then a soft apology. Then nothing. Anthony hurled the phone across the mahogany room. It cracked against the wall and slid down, leaving a scar in the wallpaper that had cost him $20,000. His chest heaved. Sweat rolled down his temple, soaking the collar of a hand-stitched Italian shirt that no longer felt like armor. In his trembling hand he gripped a single sheet of paper. It was a piano score, but nothing about it was normal. The notes were warped, drawn at angles that defied any musical convention. Strange symbols were sketched above them in red ink. Little triangles, crossed circles, numbers hiding behind flats and sharps, a language pretending to be music, a threat pretending to be art. Around the long conference table, 11 men sat in suffocating silence. 5 senior advisors from the Moretti family, men who had survived 3 decades of wars on Brooklyn's waterfront, stared at the sheet as if it might bite. 3 cryptography specialists, each pulled from retirement with a briefcase of cash, had already filled 2 notebooks with failed attempts. 2 conductors, flown in from Lincoln Center at 2 a.m, shook their heads in unison. One of them, white-haired, whispered in disbelief, "Mr. Moretti, this isn't music. This is something else. Something I've never seen in 40 years. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed once, a single clean tone that landed in the room like a gunshot. 5 hours and 47 minutes. That was all Anthony had left before the voice on the phone made good on its promise. Before Sophia, his 7-year-old daughter, the only living piece of his dead wife, stopped breathing in some cold corner of a city he once thought he owned. Frank Delgado, his consigliere of 20 years, stepped forward and placed a careful hand on his boss's shoulder. "Anthony, we'll find another way. Let me reach out to the Russians. Let me reach out to anyone." Anthony didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed around a single unbearable truth. He, the most feared man in the 5 boroughs, the man whose name made harbor captains lower their eyes, could not save his own child. And then, very softly, the heavy oak door creaked open. A small, thin shape slipped inside. 8 years old, no taller than the back of a leather chair, a gray sweater full of holes, sneakers that had been rained on so many times they'd lost their color. In her arms, clutched against her chest like a treasure, sat a plastic container of leftover chicken stew, still warm, given to her by the kitchen maid not 10 minutes earlier. The girl's blue eyes swept across the room, across the suits, across the guns tucked into holsters, across the broken glass on the marble floor. Her voice came out no louder than a breath. "Sir, I can read that music sheet." For a full second, no one moved. Then Anthony Moretti, the man who had made senators weep, threw back his head and let out a laugh that was closer to a wound than a sound. But what the most ruthless mafia boss in Brooklyn did not know, could not possibly know, was that the next 10 seconds would not only save his daughter's life, they would rip his empire open at the seams and drag into daylight a revenge plot 5 years in the making, a betrayal sleeping inside his own walls, and a secret that would change the way he looked at every face he had ever trusted. 6 hours earlier, the sun had still been shining over Brooklyn. Anthony Moretti stood at the tall bay window of his estate in Diker Heights, a cup of black espresso in one hand, the morning edition of the Wall Street Journal folded under his arm. At 37, he was the youngest patriarch the Moretti family had seen in 4 generations. His father, Giovanni, had died of a stroke 2 winters ago, leaving behind a kingdom stitched from shipping contracts, union locals, construction permits, and the kind of quiet arrangements that never made it into print. Anthony now controlled every dock from Red Hook to Sunset Park. No crate moved across the Brooklyn waterfront without a name from his ledger. Senators took his calls. Judges returned his favors. Young capos crossed themselves when they heard his footsteps in the hallway. Yet every morning, before the phone began to ring and the whispered problems began to pile up, he walked down the long corridor to a small white room at the end of the east wing, and he became someone else entirely. Inside that room stood a tiny upright piano, also white, with a cushion embroidered by hand and tied to the bench with pink ribbon. At that piano, on that cushion, sat a 7-year-old girl with dark curls and a crooked front tooth, plunking out an uneven melody she had invented herself and named after her mother. "Daddy, listen. I made the sad part shorter today. Sophia Moretti, the only part of him that was still entirely human. Her mother, Isabella, had died 3 years ago in a hospital room filled with orchids Anthony had ordered flown in from Holland. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. He had sat beside her bed for 72 hours straight, holding her hand, and the last thing she had whispered to him was not a promise of love or a plea for revenge. It was a single instruction. Don't let our daughter become you. Anthony had tried. God, he had tried. That Saturday morning, Sophia had begged to go to Prospect Park to feed the ducks. She had worn her favorite yellow raincoat, even though the sky was clear, because she said it made the ducks happier. Vincent, one of Anthony's most trusted bodyguards, had loaded her into the black SUV with a thermos of hot chocolate and a paper bag full of stale bread. 15 minutes. That was all it took for the world to end. The call came from a park ranger. Vincent had been found unconscious beside the duck pond, bleeding from a small puncture wound at the base of his neck, the kind left by a tranquilizer dart. The SUV was still parked where he had left it. The thermos was still warm. The paper bag of bread sat on the passenger seat, untouched. Sophia was gone. Anthony had been in a meeting with 2 union representatives when Frank burst through the door without knocking, something Frank had not done in 20 years. One look at his consigliere's face, and Anthony knew. 6 minutes later, his personal cell phone rang. Unknown number, blocked caller. He answered on the first vibration. The voice on the other end was not human. It had been run through a distortion filter that chopped every syllable into metallic shards. Neither masculine nor feminine, neither young nor old, just cold. Mr. Moretti, if you want to see your daughter breathing again, you will solve the music sheet that is about to arrive at your front gate. You have 12 hours, no police, no negotiators, no tricks. 12 hours, and every instruction is inside the music. The line died before Anthony could speak a single word. He ran down the marble staircase 2 steps at a time. At the front gate, a small boy on a rusted bicycle, maybe 9 years old, handed the security guard a cream-colored envelope and pedaled away without looking back. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet of paper. Anthony unfolded it with fingers that would not stop shaking, and for the first time in his life, he stared at something he could not understand. Within 40 minutes, the mansion had transformed into something between a war room and a confessional. Black sedans slid up the gravel driveway one after another, disgorging men who, under any other circumstance, would never be invited past the front gate. A retired cryptography analyst named Harold Weiss, who had decoded Soviet transmissions during the last decade of the Cold War, arrived still wearing house slippers. 2 music theory professors from Columbia, one bald, one bearded, came together in the same cab, arguing about something neither would remember by nightfall. A forensic linguist from Yale, yanked from a Saturday brunch, carried her laptop in a plastic grocery bag because she had not stopped for a briefcase. And finally, a quiet mathematician named Dr. Patel, whose papers on nonlinear symbol systems had appeared in 3 journals no one in the room had ever heard of. Anthony paid each of them without negotiation. Cash. In advance. Stacks of $100 bills counted out on the marble kitchen island by a quiet accountant who did not look up. The bearded professor rolled up his sleeves and approached the full-size Steinway Grand in the living room, the same instrument Isabella had once played carols on every Christmas Eve. He placed the warped sheet on the music stand, adjusted his glasses, and began. The sound that came out of that piano was not music. It was a wound. The first chord clashed against the second like 2 cars colliding at a blind intersection. The third note sat a half step above where it had any business being. A rest appeared in the middle of a phrase that made no grammatical sense to the ear. The professor tried to push through, fingers stiffening, until he finally stopped in the middle of a bar, his face pale. Mr. Moretti, he said without turning around. This was not written by a composer. Not by any composer I would recognize. At the long dining table, Harold Weiss had already filled 3 pages of a yellow legal pad with attempted substitutions. He scratched them all out with slow, defeated strokes. It isn't Morse, he said flatly. It isn't a simple substitution cipher. It isn't Caesar. It isn't Visionaire. It doesn't match any frequency pattern I have in 42 years of work. Whoever made this built their own language from scratch, and they built it for one reader, Dr. Patel tapped her pen against the margin. The numerical symbols don't align with any base system I recognize. Binary, ternary, hexadecimal, none of them. The intervals between the accidentals aren't mathematical. They're almost... She paused, searching for a word. Personal. Emotional. Anthony stood at the fireplace, his back to them, one hand gripping the mantel so tightly the knuckles had gone white. In the far corner of the room, almost hidden by the heavy velvet drapes, stood Marcus Reed, 40 years old, head of personal security, 15 years of service to the Moretti family, 7 of them as Anthony's shadow. He leaned against the wall with his arms loosely folded, his expression as smooth and unreadable as still water. Where the others were sweating, he was not. Where the others were pacing, he stood still. And when the bearded professor had declared the sheet unplayable, a muscle near the corner of Marcus's mouth had twitched, just once, into something that almost looked like satisfaction. Nobody noticed. Nobody except the reader who already knew where this story was going. Frank Delgado finally cleared his throat. Anthony, let me reach out. 5 million, 10, whatever they want. We pay, we take Sophia home. We hunt them later. Anthony turned from the fireplace, and the coldness in his eyes made even Frank take a half step back. They didn't ask for money, Frank, he said quietly. People who ask for money, we understand. These people want something else. And I don't know what it is yet. The grandfather clock struck again. Anthony looked at its face, at the slender brass hands inching forward without mercy, and something inside him broke. He seized the crystal vase from the side table, the Waterford piece Isabella had loved, the one he had kept polished for 3 years because she had chosen it, and he hurled it against the stone wall with a sound like a scream. Glass rained across the parquet floor in 1,000 points of light. The room held its breath. And then Anthony, the man who had not wept at his own father's funeral, sank slowly to his knees on the broken crystal and understood, for the first time in 10 years, what it felt like to be powerless. 2 floors below the broken crystal and the broken man, the kitchen of the Moretti estate smelled of simmering chicken broth and rosemary. Mrs. Dorothy Kowalski, 62 years old, Polish by birth and Brooklyn by accident, stood at the long butcher block counter with her sleeves rolled past her elbows. Everyone in the house called her Mrs. Except the older capos, who called her ma'am and meant it. She had cooked for the Moretti family since Giovanni was still alive, and she had fed 3 generations of hungry men who pretended they were not hungry. Tonight, she was not cooking for them. On the counter sat 4 plastic containers, lined up like patient soldiers. Into each she ladled a careful portion of chicken stew, a piece of buttered bread wrapped in wax paper, and a small apple from the wooden bowl by the window. She hummed a Polish lullaby as she worked, the same one her mother had hummed to her in a different kitchen, in a different country, almost 60 years ago. The back door, the old service entrance that led to the alley behind the garden, creaked open about 3 inches. A small hand appeared first, chapped red at the knuckles, then a face. Mrs. The voice barely reached across the kitchen. Dorothy did not startle. She did not even turn around. She only smiled to herself and reached for an extra piece of bread. You are late today, little bee. I was beginning to worry that boy on the corner had taken your shortcut. The child slipped through the door and eased it shut behind her so it would not make a sound. Bianca Hale, 8 years old, stood just under 4 feet tall. Her sweater had once been charcoal gray. Now it was the color of wet pavement, and a ragged hole near the elbow had been stitched 3 times with 3 different threads. Her blonde hair, tangled into soft knots, fell around a face dusted with the grime of a long walk. 2 enormous blue eyes, bright as sea glass, studied the room as if she had never quite decided whether she was allowed inside it. She lived 6 blocks east, in a crumbling rental above a laundromat, with a grandmother whose legs had stopped working the winter before last. Her father had vanished 5 years ago, in what the police report had called a residential fire with no recovered remains. Her mother had died 2 years before that, shot in the chest by a stray bullet during a concert hall massacre when Bianca was only 3. The only thing Bianca remembered of her mother was the sound of a piano. Not a melody, just the sound. Warm, round, safe. Dorothy handed her the topmost container, still warm through the plastic. Tonight it is chicken soup, good and thick, and buttered rye. Your grandma likes the rye, I remember. Thank you, Mrs. Bianca whispered. She always whispered here, as if afraid her voice might break something expensive. That was when the shout came from upstairs. It was muffled by 2 floors and a long corridor, but it was clearly a man's voice, and clearly a man who was drowning. Something heavy struck a wall. Footsteps thundered. Another voice, lower, tried to calm the first. A door slammed hard enough to shiver the copper pots hanging above the stove. Bianca froze with the container pressed against her chest. Is Mr. Moretti okay? Dorothy's face went tired in the way faces go tired when grown-ups have to explain grown-up things to children they love. She sighed and wiped her hands on her apron. He is not okay, sweetheart. His little girl, Miss Sophia, she is missing. Gone since this afternoon. Some monster took her, and now they have sent him a piece of paper. Music, but not music. Strange marks on it, numbers and symbols. Nobody in this house can make sense of it, and they have brought in men from everywhere to try. The kitchen went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Bianca did not move. Her small hands tightened around the warm container. Her blue eyes lifted slowly from the floor tiles, locked onto Dorothy's face, and something in them changed. Not curiosity, not fear, something older than both. Mrs. Dot, she said carefully, as if she were walking across thin ice, this music sheet. What does it look like? The symbols. Are they drawn above the notes? In red? Dorothy blinked. How on earth would I know, child? I have not been upstairs tonight. She shrugged with the exhausted innocence of someone who had long since learned never to ask about what happened in the upper floors of this house. Why do you ask such a thing? Bianca did not answer. Very slowly, as if her body were moving without her permission, she set the container of chicken soup down on the kitchen table. She placed it gently, the way one places a sleeping bird. Her fingers lingered on the lid for a moment, and then let go. She turned toward the narrow servant's staircase in the corner of the kitchen, the one the family never used, the one that coiled upward into the shadows of the upper floors like a question mark. Her heart was beating against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She did not know what was pulling her up those stairs. She only knew that somewhere above her, under a crystal chandelier in a room full of angry men, a sheet of paper was waiting for her, and it had been waiting for her all her life. The servant's staircase groaned under her weight, but only barely. 8-year-old bodies do not groan staircases the way grown men do. Bianca climbed on the balls of her feet, one hand sliding along the wooden rail, the other clutching the hem of her sweater the way other children clutch a stuffed animal when the lights go out. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before her. Paintings of old men in dark suits lined the walls, each of them watching her with the same painted disapproval. She had never been past this floor. Mrs. Dot had told her 100 times that the upstairs was off limits, that the upstairs was another world, that the upstairs was where things happened that little girls were never meant to see. Tonight, for the first time, Bianca disobeyed. She followed the voices. They came from the last door on the right, a heavy door of dark oak standing slightly ajar, a thin strip of golden light spilling across the runner carpet. She pressed herself flat against the wall beside it, holding her breath so tight her chest ached. Through the crack, she could see a sliver of the room. A long mahogany table, a man's hand splayed across its surface, half of Mr. Moretti's face, shining with sweat under the chandelier. And at the center of the table, lying alone like a body on a slab, a single folded sheet of paper, her eyes fixed on it, and her small heart forgot how to beat. The symbols, the way the stems bent slightly forward on the half notes, the tiny crossed circles floating above 3 of the rests, a flat sharpened by a hand-drawn triangle instead of a natural sign. She had seen those marks before, not in a book, not in a classroom, in a kitchen at a wooden table, with a glass of warm milk beside her, and a man's gentle hand guiding hers across the page. The memory arrived without warning, the way memories do when they have been buried too long. She was 3 years old. She was wearing the pink pajamas with ducks on them. A tall man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard was sitting beside her, holding a freshly sharpened pencil. He was drawing strange little shapes above a row of notes she had written, and he was laughing softly at her crooked treble clefs. These, little bird, are the secret marks of the Hale family. Only you and I know them. Not even your mother knows this language. It is ours. Ours, Papa. Ours. Promise me you will remember. I promise. She had forgotten. Of course she had forgotten. 3-year-olds forget everything that does not involve cookies or cartoons. And when her father had vanished in the fire 2 years later, the few memories she had kept of him had quietly dissolved into the kind of warm shapes children carry without names. But now, staring at that sheet of paper on Anthony Moretti's desk, the names came back. All of them. The treble clef that was not a treble clef but the letter M. The second sharp that was not a sharp but the number 4. The 8th rest that was not silence, but a single tiny space between 2 words. It was all still inside her. Her father's language was still inside her. From inside the room, a fist crashed against the table hard enough to rattle the chandelier, and Anthony Moretti's voice tore through the doorway like a blade pulled fast across a whetstone. 6 hours. I have 6 hours, and my daughter dies. Bianca's knees went liquid. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall and squeezed her eyes shut. Everyone in her neighborhood whispered about the man in this house. The butcher 2 blocks down crossed himself when the Moretti name came up. The old women at the laundromat said he had once put a rival's hand in a meat grinder. They said he had buried men under the new pier at Red Hook. They said a child was nothing to him. They said worse. If she walked into that room uninvited, she could die tonight. She was 8 years old. She had a grandmother at home who could not stand without help. She had never been to a real birthday party. She had never owned a pair of shoes that had not belonged to someone else first. She could turn around right now and walk back down the stairs and eat chicken soup and forget. But then, unbidden, another face rose in front of her closed eyes. A little girl she had never met. 7 years old, tied up in some room somewhere, crying, alone, maybe listening to men argue about how and when they would kill her. A little girl whose mother was dead, just like Bianca's. A little girl who was waiting for someone, anyone, to come. Bianca squeezed her small fists until her nails bit into her palms, and from somewhere very far away, from a memory so soft she could not tell if it was real, she heard her mother's voice. A warm voice, a voice she had not heard in 5 years. "Kindness never goes out of style, my love." Bianca opened her eyes. She straightened the hem of her ragged sweater, tucked a tangle of blonde hair behind her ear, took one breath that filled every inch of her small ribs, and pushed the heavy oak door open. The oak door swung open about 1.5 feet, and every conversation in the study died at exactly the same instant. 11 pairs of eyes snapped toward the doorway. Vincent, the bodyguard who had failed to protect Sophia at the park and had been standing in shamed silence near the window for the past 2 hours, reacted first. His hand flew inside his jacket. The polished grip of a 9mm appeared in his palm before anyone could blink. Tommy, the younger of the 2 capos in the room, a kid from Bensonhurst who had been promoted only 3 months ago, grabbed the Glock from his hip and leveled it at waist height, the way he had been trained to do with intruders. Frank Delgado, older and faster than both of them, stepped in front of Anthony and placed one broad palm on his boss's shoulder, pressing him back with the quiet weight of a man who had talked him out of violence a dozen times before. Standing in that narrow rectangle of light was a child. A child in a torn gray sweater. A child with dirt on her cheekbones and tangles in her hair. A child so small she barely came up to the doorknob she had just pushed open. Anthony turned with a face so dark the room seemed to cool around him. Who in God's name let this child in here? His voice was low, which was always worse than when he shouted. Who? Vincent? Tommy? Which one of you let a little girl walk into this room tonight? Nobody answered, because nobody had let her in. She had let herself in. Anthony took 2 heavy steps toward her. Get out. This is not a place for children. Mrs. Dot, come up here and take this child back to the kitchen before I lose what is left of my patience. Bianca did not move. Her knees were trembling so badly the hem of her sweater shook, but her feet stayed planted on the threshold. The 2 blue eyes in her small face did not leave Anthony's. Mr. Moretti, she said, and her voice was not loud, but it did not crack either. I can read those symbols, sir, on the paper. For 1/2 of 1 second, the entire room hung in silence. Then Anthony laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the sound of a man whose last nerve had finally snapped clean in half. The best cryptographers in America cannot read that paper. A man from the CIA cannot read that paper. 2 professors from Columbia, a mathematician from Princeton, 2 conductors from Lincoln Center. None of them can read that paper. And you, little girl, a kitchen stray who comes through my back door for soup, you are going to read it for me? He pointed a long finger at Frank. Get her out. Take her home. Give her $20 and a pair of my wife's old shoes and tell Mrs. Dot to lock the alley gate. Frank stepped forward, apologetic, and wrapped his thick fingers gently around the child's thin wrist. Bianca did not pull away. She did something worse. She opened her mouth and she shouted, The treble clef is not a treble clef. It is the letter M. The second sharp after the key change is not a sharp. It is the number 4. The single 8th rest is not a rest. It is the space between 2 letters in a word. The words tumbled out so fast they almost ran over each other. Frank's hand froze around her wrist. Every professor at the mahogany table lifted his head at exactly the same moment, like dogs catching a scent. Anthony, halfway turned toward the fireplace, stopped mid-step. For 3 long seconds he did not breathe. Then, very slowly, as if he were afraid sudden movement might scare away whatever had just walked into his life, he pivoted back around. What? He said quietly. Did you just say? Bianca's voice was shaking, but the sentences came out clean, one after another, like small stones dropped into still water. "This is a coded language, Mr. Moretti. My father taught it to me when I was little. He called it the Hale language. Only he and I knew it. I forgot most of it after he died. But when I saw the paper on your desk, I remembered. Please, give me 10 minutes. I can read it." Anthony's eyes moved, very slowly, from the child to Frank. Frank looked down at his watch. 5 hours and 30 minutes remained. He looked back at Anthony. He did not need to say a word. Anthony stared at the small trembling figure in the ruined sweater, at the blue eyes that had not once looked away from him, and then he raised one hand and pointed, with the steadiness of a man signing a death warrant, at the large leather armchair that had once belonged to his father. "Sit." Bianca took one step into the room. "Understand something." Anthony's voice was quiet again. "If you are lying to me, if this is some game, if you are wasting 1 minute of the time my daughter has left, I will not." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Bianca was already walking across the Persian rug toward the chair, and she understood exactly what he had not said. The leather armchair swallowed her. Bianca perched on the very edge of the cushion, her feet dangling almost a foot above the Persian rug, her thin fingers pressed flat against the armrests to keep from sliding forward. The chair had belonged to Giovanni Moretti, a man whose suits had each weighed more than the child now seated in his throne. Mrs. Dot appeared in the doorway with a tray. Nobody had called her. She simply knew. She crossed the study in silence, ignoring the professors and the gunmen as if they were furniture, and set before Bianca a tall glass of warm milk with a spoonful of honey stirred in, a plate of buttered rye cut into triangles, and a sharpened pencil she had taken from Anthony's desk drawer. She placed one hand, briefly, on the back of Bianca's neck. It was the only human touch the child had received from anyone upstairs since she had arrived. Then Mrs. Dot stepped back against the wall and folded her hands. She was not leaving that room until the child did. Bianca smoothed the warped sheet of paper across her lap with both palms. The symbols looked up at her like faces she had not seen in years but could still name. She picked up the pencil. Her hand was so small the pencil looked enormous in it, but the grip was correct. 3-fingered. Her father had taught her that too. A pencil is a scalpel, little bird. You hold it the way a surgeon holds a knife, not the way a child holds a crayon. She began. Under the very first note on the staff, she wrote, very carefully, the letter H, Dr. Patel, the mathematician, leaned forward. Why an H? Bianca did not look up. Because in the Hale language, notes are not named by their pitch. They are named by their position on the lines and spaces of the treble staff. The first space above it is B. You just keep counting. The note here is on the third line, which is H. Harold Weiss, the old cryptographer, made a small strangled sound. That is brutally simple. That is also brutally elegant. It only works, Bianca murmured, moving to the next symbol, if you know which marks turn letters into numbers. The little crossed circle above the note means this one is a number, not a letter. So this note is 17, because it is the 17th position from the bottom of the bass clef, not the treble one. You have to switch clefs halfway. She drew a small 1 and a small 7 on her paper. A sharp adds 1 to the number. A flat subtracts 1. A double sharp adds 2. My father used to make me do these in my head while I ate breakfast. Anthony had moved behind her chair without making a sound. He stood with one hand on the high back of the leather, the other pressed flat against his mouth as if to keep himself from making any noise at all. He was not breathing. He was watching a miracle unfold in pencil strokes above a glass of milk. Every few seconds, Bianca paused. She tilted her head. She counted something on her fingers. She crossed out one letter and replaced it with another. Then she moved on. In the far corner, half hidden by the velvet drape, Marcus Reed stood exactly where he had been standing an hour earlier. But something had changed on his face. The color had drained out of his cheeks so completely that his lips looked faintly blue. His jaw had clenched tight enough to show a small muscle pulsing beneath the skin. His right hand, hanging loose at his side, had slowly curled into a fist, and the knuckles had gone white. For one brief moment, his eyes darted toward the doorway, as if measuring the distance to it, and then snapped back to the child. Nobody saw it. Everyone was watching the girl. Everyone except Mrs. Dot, who saw everything, and filed it quietly away in the back of her mind the way older women do. 8 minutes passed. 8 minutes during which no one in the room spoke, no one coughed, no one shifted weight. Frank had stopped looking at his watch. Vincent had holstered his pistol. The bearded professor had set his reading glasses down on the table and was simply watching the child's pencil, the way a man watches a surgeon's scalpel. Bianca wrote the last character. She stared at the page. Her brow furrowed. She put the pencil down. She picked it up again. She wrote something else in the margin, smaller this time, almost to herself. She put the pencil down once more. Her small shoulders rose and fell with a long, slow breath. Then she spoke. "It is an address, Mr. Moretti." Her voice was tired now, the voice of a child who has been inside her own head for too long. And there is something else, something underneath it. I have to look again because Anthony did not wait. He reached over her shoulder and snatched the paper off her lap before she had finished her sentence. He read it once, then again. Warehouse 17, Red Hook Docks, Brooklyn, 11 o'clock tonight. He raised his head and looked at Frank, and the weight of 5 years of marriage, 3 years of widowerhood, and 7 hours of terror all collapsed into the 2 words that came out of his mouth. Get everyone. Frank was already moving. Vincent was already moving. Tommy was already running down the hallway, shouting for the drivers to bring the cars up from the garage. The study exploded into motion. Suits flying, weapons checked, radios clicked on. A storm of men preparing to ride out into the Brooklyn night. Bianca opened her mouth. "But there is a second layer," she tried to say. "The rests are wrong in 7 places. I have not read those yet. There is more, Mr. Moretti, please listen, there is more." Nobody heard her. The last man out of the study slammed the heavy oak door behind him, and in the sudden silence, the child sat alone in a chair too large for her, holding a pencil in a trembling hand, staring at the place where the paper she had not finished reading used to be. The basement of the Moretti estate had been designed for exactly this kind of night. Behind a false wine cellar, past a steel door that required both a key and a 6-digit code, lay a room the size of a small gymnasium, its walls lined with black foam panels and its cabinets stocked with enough hardware to outfit a private infantry. Frank Delgado moved through it now like a surgeon through an operating theater, calling names and tossing gear. Kevlar vests, level 4, 12 of them. "Angelo, you're on radios. I want every unit on the encrypted channel, backup frequency on standby. Tommy, breaching charges. Vincent, you ride point with me. Any man who fires before I give the word will answer to me before he answers to the boss." 12 men responded without a wasted word. Assault rifles came off the racks. Spare magazines slid into tactical belts. Night vision optics were clipped to helmets. Medical kits were strapped to thighs. Every piece of equipment made a small metallic sound, and together those sounds formed a kind of low and terrible music. Upstairs, in the dressing room adjacent to his study, Anthony Moretti sat alone on a padded bench before a tall oval mirror. His reflection looked unfamiliar to him tonight. On the counter beside him lay the Desert Eagle his father had given him on his 21st birthday. The one Giovanni had joked was too heavy for anyone who still thought of themselves as civilized. Anthony broke it down now with the calm of a priest preparing a chalice. Slide, barrel, spring. He checked each component, oiled the action, slid a magazine of 50 caliber rounds into the grip, and chambered the first round with a sound that closed like a door. Behind him, in the doorway, a small shape was hesitating. He saw her in the mirror before he turned. "What is it, little one?" Bianca took one step inside the room. Just one. Her fingers were tangled into the torn edge of her sweater. "Mr. Moretti," she said carefully, "would you let me come with you? Please?" Anthony let out a short, dry laugh that had no warmth in it, only exhaustion. "Absolutely not. You have done your part tonight, more than any part I had any right to ask of a child. I am grateful. I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life. But you are staying in this house, with Mrs. Where it is safe. That is the end of that conversation." He holstered the pistol under his jacket and reached for his coat. "But, sir," Bianca's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, "if something in the music is not quite right, if I miss something." Anthony had already walked past her. "You did not miss anything. You gave me an address. An address is all I need. Stay with Mrs. I will come back with Sophia, and then we will talk about everything." He was already in the hallway. Marcus Reed followed him out. As Marcus passed the doorway, he turned his head and looked down at Bianca for the space of one breath. The look was not angry. The look was not cruel. The look was colder than either of those things. It was the look of a man measuring the size of a problem he might soon have to solve. Then he was gone, and the scent of his cologne lingered in the air behind him like something faintly metallic. At 10:15 at night, 3 black SUVs rolled down the gravel driveway of the Moretti estate in perfect formation, taillights disappearing one by one, as they turned through the wrought iron gate and slid into the wet Brooklyn dark. Bianca ran to the nearest window on the second floor, pressed her forehead to the cold glass, and watched until the last pair of red lights had vanished behind the row of maple trees at the end of the block. Mrs. Dot came up behind her and laid a warm palm on her small shoulder. "You did an impossible thing tonight, sweetheart. Whatever happens now, nobody can take that from you." Bianca did not answer. She turned away from the window and walked slowly back down the hallway toward the study. The oak door stood ajar, just as it had when the men had left it. The leather armchair was still pushed out from the desk, the glass of warm milk still half full, the plate of buttered rye untouched. On the mahogany desk, weighted down by a brass paperweight shaped like a lion, lay the original sheet of coded music. Anthony had taken her translation with him. He had left the original behind. Bianca crossed the rug on tiptoe and climbed back into the enormous chair. The paper was right there. The pencil was right there. The milk was still barely warm. She pulled the sheet closer and bent over it. For a moment, she simply looked at the whole page again, not note by note, but as a shape. An 8-year-old who had spent the last 3 years teaching herself to read on library floors knew something adults often forgot. When you are looking for what is hidden, you do not stare at the words. You stare at the spaces between them. And the spaces on this page were wrong. She began to count the beats inside the first bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. She moved to the second. 1, 2, 3, 4. The third. 1, 2, 3, 4. She moved to the fourth bar. She counted again. Her pencil froze. In the fourth bar, there were 5 beats. Not 4, 5. She flipped the page. In the 7th bar, there were 3.5. In the 11th, there were 4.5. In the 16th, there were 5 again. No professional musician would ever write this. No competent cryptographer would ever miss it. Her father had hidden these mistakes so carefully that unless you were looking for them, your eye would glide right over them the way it glides over the wobble in a well-rehearsed lie. Bianca lifted the pencil to her lips and pressed the cold wood against them. "Papa," she whispered to the paper, to a ghost, to a man whose face she had not seen in 5 years. "What else are you trying to tell me?" Rain fell in thin silver needles across the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, as the 3 black SUVs tore south in tight formation, tires hissing against the slick asphalt. Inside the middle vehicle, Anthony Moretti sat in the rear passenger seat with the Desert Eagle resting across his right thigh, and his left hand closed around a small leather wallet. He did not open the wallet. He did not need to. He knew every crease of the photograph tucked inside it. Sophia, age 6, taken at the boardwalk in Coney Island on a July afternoon 2 summers ago. Chocolate ice cream on her chin, a gap where her front tooth had fallen out the night before. Laughing at something her father had said, something he could no longer remember. She had 2 baby teeth still missing from that smile. He had once promised her the tooth fairy would bring enough quarters to buy a whole carousel ride. Frank Delgado rode beside him, a compact submachine gun across his knees, the dim green glow of the dashboard throwing shadows across his face. "Boss," Frank said quietly, low enough that the driver could not hear, "I need to say something." Anthony did not look away from the window. "Then say it. That little girl. The one back at the house. She is not a normal street kid. I know. I have been asking questions while we were gearing up. Mrs. Dot has been feeding her leftovers for almost 2 years. Nobody knows where she came from. Nobody knows her last name. She shows up. She leaves. She never asks for more than what fits in one container." Frank paused. "Boss, a child who reads a code that a CIA man cannot read. That is not a coincidence. That is a very specific kind of child." Anthony finally turned his head. "When Sophia is home tonight, safe, asleep in her bed, I will buy that little girl a house, Frank. I will pay for her grandmother's doctors. I will send her to the best school in Manhattan. I will find out who she is, and I will take care of her. But that is a conversation for tomorrow morning. Tonight we go and get my daughter." Frank nodded once and said nothing more. In the front passenger seat, Marcus Reed sat very still with his rifle upright between his knees. He flicked his eyes toward the rearview mirror. Just once. Long enough to see that Anthony was looking down at the photograph again and not at him. Marcus swallowed. The motion traveled down his throat like something dry being forced past a narrow opening. His right hand, resting on the barrel of the rifle, tightened a hair, then relaxed, then tightened again. The radio clip to the dashboard crackled. Commander to lead vehicle. 8 minutes to objective. Scout team reports the dock perimeter is clear. No headlights on adjacent streets, no foot patrols, no visible countermeasures. Warehouse 17 is showing interior light on the east side. Nothing else. Frank thumbed his own radio. Maintain current spacing. Radio silence on approach. Anthony's fist closed around the grip of the Desert Eagle until his knuckles creaked. He had killed men with this hand. He had ordered men killed with this voice. He had stood in warehouses, not unlike the one they were driving toward, and watched blood pool on concrete floors because of decisions he had made while drinking espresso. The Moretti name was written in that blood across 4 decades of Brooklyn history, but he had never, in all of it, been afraid. Tonight was different. Tonight his own life was not the currency on the table. Tonight the currency was a 7-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile, and the man who had spent 20 years teaching himself not to flinch was suddenly, almost unbearably, afraid. The convoy killed its headlights 2 blocks out. The SUVs rolled the final stretch on parking lights only. Engines dropped to a low hum, and came to a stop about 200 meters from the warehouse, tucked into the shadow of a rusted shipping container stack. Doors opened without a sound. 12 men stepped out into the drizzle, rifles up, boots making almost no noise on the wet asphalt. Warehouse 17 squatted at the far end of a weed-cracked lot, a long rectangular box of galvanized steel, its loading bay bolted shut from the outside, its narrow windows boarded over with plywood. A single broken smokestack leaned at a tired angle from the roof. Somewhere inside, a pale yellow light leaked through the cracks around a side door, the only sign of life in the whole block. Frank pressed the radio to his mouth. 3-point approach. Alpha team on the main door with me. Bravo team takes the east loading bay. Charlie team covers the fire exit on the north side. No shots until visual confirmation of the child. I repeat, no shots until visual confirmation. Move. The men moved. Anthony did not wait for them. He walked ahead of the line, straight down the middle of the lot, his coat flaring behind him in the wind, rain collecting on the barrel of the Desert Eagle now raised in his right hand. Tactical flashlights came on along the rifles behind him, sweeping the warehouse facade in quick white arcs. At the main door, Anthony did not knock. He put one gloved hand against the cold metal handle, drew one breath deep enough to reach the bottom of his lungs, and pushed the door open into the dark. The interior of the warehouse was a cathedral of dust. Anthony's flashlight cut through the blackness in a single white beam. Concrete floor, stained with decades of oil, rusted chains hanging from steel rafters. The smell of salt, mold, and something faintly chemical, like old solvent. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing except, at the exact geometric center of the warehouse floor, a single wooden chair. On the chair sat a plush bear. It was roughly the size of a small child. Its fur was honey brown. Around its neck, someone had tied a red silk ribbon, and on its lap, neatly folded, lay a yellow raincoat. The raincoat Sophia had worn to the park that morning. Anthony stopped walking. Behind him, 12 armed men froze in a ragged half-circle, flashlight beams converging on the bear. What the hell? He did not finish. Clang. The sound was enormous. 3 steel plates, each the thickness of a bank vault, slammed down in perfect synchronization from concealed tracks above the 3 entry points. The main door behind them, the east loading bay to their right, the fire exit across the far wall. Hydraulic pistons hissed and groaned as each plate seated itself into the floor with a grinding metallic finality that sounded less like a door closing and more like a coffin lid being welded shut. Frank spun and threw his full weight against the nearest plate. His shoulder bounced off. He hammered his fist against it, listening to the dull, flat thunk. "Sealed," he shouted. 10-inch plate steel, reinforced. We are not breaking out of this. Every radio on every tactical vest began to screech at the same instant. A high, shrill electronic wail. Then silence. The green lights on the encrypted channels went red one by one. Angelo lifted his wrist to check the military GPS strapped there, and the small screen that should have shown their coordinates displayed nothing but rolling static snow. Above them, set into the rafters, 20 industrial stadium lamps that nobody had noticed in the dark suddenly ignited as one. The glare was blinding. 12 trained men threw their forearms over their eyes. Vincent staggered backward into a support column. Tommy dropped to one knee, blinking tears. For 3 full seconds, the entire Moretti strike team was as helpless as newborns. When their vision returned, They understood everything. The warehouse walls were not warehouse walls. They were armored steel panels, roughly 2 inches thick, installed behind the old galvanized sheeting as a second hidden shell. At chest height around the entire perimeter of the room, someone had cut firing slits, narrow horizontal rectangles no wider than a postcard. Through each slit, the muzzle of a rifle now protruded. 24 of them, by Frank's quick count, arranged in a methodical ring around the trapped men. The shooters themselves were invisible behind the steel. Only the barrels, dark and patient, watching. The Moretti team had walked into a kill box. A speaker mounted high on the east wall crackled to life, with the soft, warm hiss of an analog amplifier being switched on. And then a voice spoke. It was a cultivated voice, a voice that had taken elocution lessons, baritone, unhurried, carrying the slight ironic lilt of a man who had once spent a great deal of time in concert halls. "Welcome, Mr. Moretti. Please, make yourself comfortable. We have a great deal to talk about, you and I. More than one evening can hold, I suspect." Anthony raised the Desert Eagle toward the speaker and fired once into the steel wall. The .50 caliber round struck, flattened, and ricocheted harmlessly into a rafter. "Where is my daughter?" he roared. "Who the hell are you? Show your face. Coward." The voice in the speaker laughed softly. It was not a cruel laugh. It was worse than cruel. It was patient. "Your daughter is safe, Mr. Moretti. Perfectly safe. She is sitting in a warm room at this very moment, with a mug of hot chocolate, a blanket across her lap, and a cartoon playing on a small television. Nobody has raised a voice in her presence. Nobody has laid a finger on her. I am not a monster, you see, unlike some people in this room." Anthony's chest was rising and falling fast enough that the men nearest to him could hear it. From somewhere in the rear of the warehouse, hidden until this moment behind a stack of old crates, came a new sound. The slow, deliberate cadence of footsteps descending a metal staircase. Each step rang against the concrete like the striking of a small bell. Every flashlight on every rifle swung toward the sound. The beams converged on the base of the stairs. A tall figure stepped down into the pool of white light. He was 42 years old, though premature silver at his temples made him look older. His coat was long, black, elegant, buttoned to the throat in the European manner. His hair was swept back from a thoughtful, almost gentle face, the kind of face one might see leading a chamber orchestra at Carnegie Hall on a quiet Sunday afternoon. His shoulders were squared. His hands were clean. He wore no weapon. In his right hand, held almost lazily between 2 fingers, was a slim black conductor's baton. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, tilted his head slightly to one side, and looked at Anthony Moretti the way a composer looks at a score he has been waiting a very long time to hear performed. The man walked forward into the full glare of the stadium lamps, with the measured gait of someone entering a stage he had rehearsed for a very long time. He stopped 6 paces from Anthony Moretti. Up close, under the white light, his features sharpened into something almost painfully recognizable. The line of his brow, the angle of his jaw, the particular blue of his eyes, so pale they seemed almost translucent, the kind of blue one sees only in children and in certain Scandinavian stained glass. Anthony, who had spent the last hour standing over an 8-year-old girl, had been staring at those exact eyes not 2 hours ago. Only those eyes had been soft. These were frozen. The man inclined his head in a small, almost courteous bow. "My name is Victor Hale. You will not recognize it. Men like you do not generally bother to remember the names of civilians who cross your line of fire." Anthony's mind began to spin. The name touched something. A headline, perhaps. A police file flipped across his desk and thrown away. Something. Victor waited. He was not in any hurry. He watched Anthony try to place the syllables the way a chess master watches an opponent reach for the wrong piece. "But I am certain," he said very softly, "that you remember the name Elena Hale." The color left Anthony Moretti's face in a single visible wave. For a moment, he was no longer in a warehouse. He was standing inside Carnegie Hall on a winter evening 5 years earlier. He had bought the ticket himself, under another name, because he had been told the Bellini family might attempt a hit on him at the Russian tea room that same night, and he had changed his plans at the last minute. The concert had been a fundraiser for a children's music school in Harlem. He had been seated in the 4th row of the mezzanine. A young woman in a cream-colored dress had walked onto the stage. She had sat down at a 9-foot concert grand, smiled at the audience with the nervous joy of a soloist in her prime, and lifted her hands to the keys. She had played 11 measures of Debussy. 11 measures. At the 12th, the rear doors of the main floor had burst open. 4 men from the Bellini family had come in with automatic weapons and opened fire in a blind, wild arc toward the row where they had been told Anthony Moretti would be sitting. They had been told wrong. Anthony had moved to the mezzanine. Their rounds had raked the orchestra floor, the first 2 rows, the aisles, and, traveling upward through the soft architecture of that beautiful old room, the stage. One of them had hit the pianist. He remembered the exact sound she had made. It had not been a scream. It had been a soft, surprised exhalation, like someone being told unexpected news. Then she had slumped sideways off the bench, and her right hand had trailed across the keys on the way down. And the last thing anyone in that hall had heard before the screaming started was a single, falling chromatic phrase played by a dying woman's fingertips. Her name had been in every newspaper the next morning. Elena Hale. My wife, Victor said quietly. He let the 2 words sit in the air of the warehouse like smoke. The most beautiful woman in the world. The best musician of her generation. The mother of my 3-year-old daughter. She died that night, Mr. Moretti, because of you. Because of your war. Because 4 men walked into a concert hall looking for you, and you were not where they thought you would be, and so they shot the woman on the stage instead. Anthony tried to speak. His voice came out hoarse. That was an accident. I did not order that night. I did not want that to happen. Victor smiled. It was not a smile with any joy in it. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting 5 years to hear exactly those words in exactly that order. Not want, he repeated. What a magnificent little phrase. What a gift it must be. To be so powerful that the things you do not want still happen, and you still go home, and you still sleep in your own bed. My wife bled to death on a concert stage, and you did not want it. My daughter grew up without her mother, and you did not want it. I stood at a closed casket funeral holding a 3-year-old who kept asking me when Mama was going to come home and finish the lullaby, and you did not want it. He raised the slim black baton in his right hand and leveled it at Anthony's chest the way another man might have leveled a pistol. Tonight, Mr. Moretti, I am going to teach you the word not want in the language I have been speaking for the last 5 years. Tonight, you are going to learn what it feels like to stand on one side of a wall while your only daughter dies on the other side, and to want, with every cell in your body, for it not to happen, and to be completely, perfectly, powerless to stop it. Sophia. Anthony's voice tore out of him like something bleeding. Where is Sophia? Show her to me. Show her to me now. Victor's free hand went inside the long black coat. It came back out holding a slim aluminum tablet. He touched the screen. He turned the tablet to face Anthony Moretti, angling it so that every man in the warehouse could see. The image flickered into clarity. A small, warmly lit bedroom. A quilted blanket spread across a rag rug. Sophia Moretti, alive, unharmed, seated cross-legged on the floor, with a plush rabbit clutched against her chest, watching a cartoon on a small portable television. She was even smiling, faintly, at something on the screen. And beside her, propped against the leg of a nightstand, sat a neat gray brick of plastic explosive the size of a paperback novel. A detonator with a digital readout had been clipped to its side. The number on the readout glowed a soft, patient red. 1 hour, 45 minutes, 0 seconds. And beneath it, with the quiet cruelty of a perfect machine, it began to count down. Something feral tore out of Anthony Moretti's throat. He lunged forward with the Desert Eagle raised, and it took both of Frank Delgado's arms locked across his chest to stop him from crossing the 6 feet of concrete between himself and Victor Hale. Frank's boots skidded backward. The older man nearly went down under the weight of his boss's fury. Boss, no, not yet. Not like this. Victor did not even flinch. He waited, patient as a metronome, until Anthony stopped straining against Frank's grip and simply stood there, heaving, the pistol still raised but no longer aimed at anything. Allow me, Victor said softly, to describe your current situation so that you will not spend your last moments on pointless optimism. Your tactical team numbers 12 men. You are armed with assault rifles, sidearms, and the kind of body armor one can order on the internet if one knows the right suppliers. That is all very impressive. On a normal evening. This is not a normal evening. He gestured around them with the tip of his baton. This warehouse contains 24 shooters. You cannot see them, but I assure you they can see you. The inner walls are 2 inches of hardened ballistic steel, cut with firing slits that accept the muzzle but not a returning round. Above your heads, mounted to the rafters at 4 cardinal points, are 4 remotely detonated claymore mines, each aimed downward into a kill cone that overlaps the next. Every radio frequency in this building has been jammed by a unit the size of a shoebox. Every cell signal has been smothered. The door you came through will not open again from the inside for anyone on your side of the steel. There is no exit, Mr. Moretti. There is only the time I choose to allow you." Anthony was no longer listening to the words. His eyes were moving across the faces of his own men, slowly, one by one. Frank, at his side, pale but steady. Vincent, to his left, rifle lowered, jaw clenched. Tommy, the kid, wide-eyed, breathing through his teeth. Angelo at the rear, radio dead in his hand. Anthony counted. 11. He should have seen 12. His gaze tracked back across the formation and then past it, to the edge of the circle of his own men, and then beyond that edge, into the space between his team and the man in the long black coat. Marcus Reed was standing there. Not with the team, with Victor. Marcus had moved, at some point in the last 2 minutes, 3 careful steps away from the tactical formation and 3 careful steps toward the conductor. He stood now with his rifle angled down toward the floor and one hand resting casually on his hip, the way a man stands when he is no longer expecting to be shot at. Anthony's face did something his face had never done before. It broke. Marcus. The word came out so quietly that the men near him almost did not hear it. Then louder. Marcus. Then louder still, torn out of him like meat off a bone. Marcus. You son of a bitch. 15 years, Marcus Reed shrugged. He unslung the rifle from his shoulder, drew a black-handled automatic pistol from the small-of-back holster he had carried for 7 years at his boss's expense, and leveled it, without any particular emotion, at Anthony's chest. 15 years of shining your shoes, Anthony. 15 years of standing in the rain holding an umbrella over your head at funerals. 15 years of being called my dog by your capos when you were not in the room, and having to smile about it when you were. You paid me the salary of 1 man while you earned the salary of 50, and every year you promised me a seat at the table, and every year the table stayed exactly the size it had always been. This is not personal. This is not revenge. This is business. I took the better offer. That is all. Victor nodded as if confirming a line item on a ledger. Mr. Reed has been an invaluable partner these past 2 years. He provided Sophia's school schedule, her pediatrician appointments, the rotation of her bodyguards at the park, your cellular numbers, your daily calendar, the location of your safe room and its contents. He even, if you can believe it, was the one who placed the envelope at your front gate this afternoon. The little boy on the bicycle was his nephew. Anthony sank. It was not a fall. His legs simply stopped carrying him. He went down onto one knee, then both, and the Desert Eagle dropped with a heavy clatter onto the concrete beside him. The pain in his chest was not the pain of a bullet. It was older and deeper than that. It was the pain of a man realizing that the house he had built had been constructed, all along, on top of a grave that already had his name on it. Frank moved fast. His hand went for the compact pistol at his ankle. Victor raised one palm. No, Mr. Delgado. I would not. The shooters along these walls are not under my command. They are under Mr. Reed's. If a single round leaves a Moretti weapon tonight, every firing slit in this room opens up at once, and every man on your side is dead inside 4 seconds. You will have your vengeance for approximately the duration of a sneeze. Choose, Mr. Delgado. A few more minutes of breathing, or instant death for all of you. The math is not complicated. Frank's fingers were shaking. He closed them around the grip, held it there. Then he drew the pistol out, flipped it slowly, and set it on the concrete at his feet. One by one, the other 11 men of the Moretti tactical team did the same. Rifles, sidearms, knives, backup pieces strapped to calves and underarms. The sound of metal being laid onto concrete repeated itself for nearly a full minute. Victor walked a slow half-circle around Anthony, still kneeling at the center of his fallen weapons. In approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes, he said, almost gently, the countdown beside your daughter will reach 0, and the brick of plastic explosive against the leg of that nightstand will reduce the room and everything in it to fragments no larger than a coin. You will not be present. You will be dying in this warehouse, alongside every man who has ever helped you keep your empire standing. You will lose everything in the same minute, Mr. Moretti. Your daughter, your men, your kingdom, your name. Feel it. Take your time. It will be the last thing you ever feel. And at that exact moment, on the 2nd floor of the Moretti estate, almost 4 miles north, an 8-year-old girl in a torn gray sweater bent lower over the original sheet of music, and for the very first time, noticed the strangeness hiding inside the silences. Mrs. Dot appeared in the doorway of the study holding a small porcelain cup of ginger tea. She set it down at the edge of the desk, just within the reach of the child hunched over the music sheet. Bianca did not look up. Mrs. Dot did not expect her to. She placed a folded napkin beside the cup and withdrew to the hallway, where she lowered herself into the armchair. Victor would never know had once held her own grief on the night Giovanni Moretti had died. In the warm lamplight of Anthony's study, Bianca pressed the sharpened tip of the pencil against the first measure of the score and began to count aloud in a whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4. She moved to the second measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Third. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half. Her pencil froze halfway across the staff. A bar of music in 4/4 time contains exactly 4 beats, not 4.5. A half beat of extra air is not a mistake a trained composer makes. It is not a mistake a trained copyist catches. It is the kind of mistake that slips past everybody, because the ear, when it is inside a melody, does not count. The ear trusts. Bianca did not trust. She went back to the beginning and counted the entire page, bar by bar, her small fingernail pressing against the paper beneath each note, as if marking off prisoners at a head count. In 8 minutes, she had found them all. 7 bars, scattered across the whole score, each of them carrying either a quarter beat too many or a quarter beat too few. A 16th rest tucked into a place where no 16th rest belonged. An extended dotted pause that stretched a breath longer than the time signature allowed. A held tie across a bar line that added a whisper of sound after the music should have stopped. Each one a small, surgical imperfection. Each one invisible to a cryptographer who could not hear music. Invisible to a musician who could not think in cipher. Visible only to the one kind of reader who lived in both worlds at once. Her father's voice came back to her then, out of the same deep place the Hail language had come from. Little bird, in music. A wrong silence is where the truth hides. A listener will always forgive the rests. Only the one who knows will hear what the composer is really saying. Her heart started beating in a way that felt less like a heartbeat and more like a drum. She pulled a fresh sheet of blank paper from the desk, a heavier bond that Anthony used for signatures, and wrote out the 7 anomalies in a single neat column. Measure number, position, extra or missing value, the small supplementary symbol that sat above each anomalous rest, the mark she had skipped over the first time because she had thought it was only decoration. Then she applied the Hail system a second time, but now inverted. Now she read only the silences. The extra beats were letters. The missing beats were numbers. The decorative symbols, reconsidered through this second lens, were directional indicators. West, north, up, down. In less than 5 minutes, a new sentence bled across the page in her child's careful handwriting. Beneath the floor, trap door, sewer tunnel, 80 paces west, climb out. The battalion does not know. She stared at the line. She read it again. Her small chest stopped moving. This was not a direction to the prison. The first layer of the code had been the direction to the prison. This was a direction out. A way for the men trapped inside Warehouse 17 to escape. A sewer access point. A tunnel. 80 westward paces to a rise. A climb out somewhere beyond the perimeter. A route that the shooters ringing the warehouse did not know about, because the man who had hidden it in the score had written it only to be read by someone who knew his language. Her father. Her father had built a trap, and then her father had built a door. Her father had meant for someone to find both. For a long instant, Bianca sat very still while the weight of what she was holding settled into her 8-year-old ribs. Her father had not wanted to kill Mr. Moretti. Not truly. He had designed an exit he could pretend he had not designed. He had composed revenge with one hand, and mercy with the other, and he had hidden the mercy in the rests, because rests are where the composer is alone. But then a colder thought reached her. If her father had wanted this exit to be found, why had he hidden it so deep that she had almost missed it? The answer arrived with a chill that ran up the back of her neck. Because her father had not been writing alone. Someone had been standing beside him while he worked. Someone who expected a trap and only a trap. Someone her father did not dare show his second page to. Someone who would kill the mercy the instant it was seen. Her father had been under watch. Her father was still under watch. Her father was in danger too. Bianca shoved back from the desk so hard the heavy leather chair rolled 2 feet across the rug and banged against a side table. She grabbed the decoded sheet, folded it twice, jammed it into the pocket of her sweater, and ran. Her footsteps thundered down the hallway in a way they had not dared to make on the way up. She burst into the corridor above the stairs at full speed. Mrs. Dot, I need a car. Right now, I need a car. I need someone to drive me to Red Hook. Right now, please, Mrs. Dot rose from the armchair and caught the tiny sprinting body against her apron before Bianca could throw herself down the staircase. Her hands closed around the child's thin shoulders. Sweetheart, slow down. Breathe. You are 8 years old. What are you saying? Where are you trying to go? Bianca looked up at her with wet, wild, furious blue eyes. I sent them into a trap, Mrs. Dot. I sent Mr. Moretti into a trap, and the only way out is something I just figured out, and there is nobody else in the world who can read it. And if I do not get there in the next hour, every man in that warehouse is going to die, and so is his little girl. Please, I need a car. Mrs. Dot made the call with fingers that shook so badly she misdialed twice. On the third try, a tired voice answered on the second ring. Ma? It's almost midnight. Tell me it's not the boiler again. Jerry, you listen to me. You drop whatever you are doing, and you bring that taxi of yours to the back alley of the house on 82nd Street. Not in 10 minutes. Not in 7. You come right now. There is a child in this house who has to be somewhere, and I cannot drive, and you know what family is. Do not ask me questions. You will get them all later. Jerry Kowalski did not ask questions. He had been raised by Dorothy Kowalski, and a son raised by Dorothy Kowalski did not argue with that particular tone of voice. He pulled on a jacket over his undershirt, grabbed the keys to his battered yellow Toyota Camry from a bowl on the kitchen counter, and was rolling out of his garage in South Slope in under 2 minutes. 8 minutes later, the Camry pulled up to the back alley with its engine still hot. Bianca came out of the service door at a full run, the decoded sheet clutched against her chest with both hands. Her sweater was still torn. Her sneakers were still soaked. The ginger tea had long since gone cold on Anthony's desk, untouched. Jerry leaned across and threw the passenger door open. He got one look at the small creature sprinting toward him in the drizzle, and the tail of a curse died in his mouth. She threw herself into the front seat and slammed the door. Go. Please, Mr. Red Hook Docks, Warehouse 17. Jerry turned in his seat and squinted at her. He was 54 years old, mostly bald, with kind brown eyes that had driven this city for 31 years and had never, until tonight, been asked to drive an 8-year-old child alone to a cargo terminal at midnight. Kid, little one, my mother told me to take you somewhere, but the Red Hook cargo piers are not somewhere a child goes in the middle of the night. Those warehouses, they are not abandoned. They are used, and not by nice men. If you have got a problem, we go to the precinct, we go to the hospital, we go to my mother's apartment. Anywhere but Red Hook. Bianca looked up at him with eyes that had stopped crying 2 blocks ago, and had settled into something much harder. Mr. Jerry, please. There is a little girl my age, who is going to die in about an hour, and her father is going to die, and there are 12 men who are going to die with him. I am the only person in the world who can stop it. If we go to the police, I will still be explaining the music sheet when she is already dead. Please. Jerry stared at her. Then he swore under his breath in Polish, the way his mother had when she was terrified, and he put the Camry in drive. Buckle in, kid. You are about to learn what this heap can do. The Toyota tore out of the alley in a spray of wet gravel and turned hard onto 82nd Street with the rear tires fishtailing through a puddle that threw up a sheet of black water against the passing brownstones. Behind them, in the kitchen of the Moretti estate, Mrs. Dot picked up a landline and began punching in the number of Frank Delgado's secure line. She tried it once. She tried it twice. She tried 3 more backup numbers for 3 more men she had fed soup to over the years. Every single line rang twice, and then dissolved into the same flat electronic nothing. Somewhere south of her, every radio frequency and every cellular tower serving the waterfront was being suffocated by a box the size of a shoe. Mrs. Dot sank down onto a kitchen chair, crossed herself in the Polish manner, and began to pray. Inside Warehouse 17, Victor Hale had stepped closer to Anthony. The conductor lowered himself into a crouch so that his face was level with the face of the kneeling man. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Do you know something, Mr. Moretti? I have a daughter, too. She is 8 years old now. Her name is Bianca. For the past 5 years, she has lived 6 blocks east of your estate, in a single room above a laundromat, with a grandmother who cannot stand up on her own. She has eaten leftovers out of other people's kitchens. She has walked to school in shoes that never fit. She has slept some nights in a hallway because the heater in her building does not work when the landlord does not feel like paying his gas bill. His voice began, very quietly, to tremble. I have watched her every day of those 5 years. From across streets, from the other side of playgrounds, through the windows of bakeries. I could not come closer. If anyone learned that Victor Hale was still alive, the entire plan collapsed, and my Elena stayed unavenged. So I watched. I watched her grow up cold. I watched her grow up hungry. I watched the light in her go a little smaller each winter, and I could not lift one single finger to help her. Do you know what that is, Mr. Moretti? To watch your own child suffer and not be allowed to touch her? Anthony lifted his head. The thing in his eyes was no longer hatred. It was not even fear. It was the one emotion Victor Hale had never expected to see on the face of the man he had spent 5 years designing this room to destroy. Recognition. I do, Anthony said quietly. I know it. Because if Sophia dies in the next hour, that will be the only thing I will feel for every minute of every year I have left. So yes, Mr. Hale, I know. The two men looked at each other across 6 feet of cold white light. A Mafia boss on his knees, a conductor holding a baton, and for one brief suspended moment, the war between them paused, because the thing underneath the war was the same thing. On the tablet in Victor's other hand, the red numbers continued their quiet work. 1 hour, 2 minutes. And somewhere above the Brooklyn waterfront, Jerry Kowalski's battered yellow Toyota raced across the Brooklyn Bridge through a wall of driving rain, its wipers beating a frantic rhythm, its small passenger pressing her forehead against the cold window, as if willing the road to fold itself shorter under the wheels. The Camry came to a hard stop behind a rusted shipping container 300 meters from the warehouse. Jerry killed the headlights. He killed the engine. He squinted through the smeared windshield at the silhouettes he had caught moving along the chain-link perimeter ahead. 2 men. Then a third, farther down. A fourth on a catwalk, backlit by a single amber dock lamp, holding something long and rifle-shaped against his chest. He had driven this town for 3 decades. He knew the difference between a dock worker and a sentry. These were sentries. Kid. Little one. I cannot take this car 1 inch closer. Those are not security guards. Those are the other thing. Bianca was already unbuckling. Stay here, Mr. Jerry. I will come back. If I am not back in 1 hour, you drive away. You tell Mrs. I am sorry. Little one, please, let me call the cops. Just let me call them. She paused with her hand on the door latch and turned to look at him with an expression no 8-year-old should ever have worn. By the time the police get here, Sophia will already be dead. There is a bomb, Mr. Jerry. There is a bomb on a countdown. She opened the door and was gone before he could find his voice. The drizzle had thickened into a steady cold rain. Bianca crouched and ran along the backside of the container stack, her torn sneakers slapping through shallow puddles, her soaked sweater hanging off her small frame like a second wet skin that kept trying to drag her down. Every 30 or 40 feet she stopped, pressed her back against cold corrugated steel, and listened. Somewhere above her, the sentry on the catwalk made a slow pass from north to south, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the drizzle in a lazy white cone. She waited for the cone to pass. She ran. She reached the edge of the weed-cracked lot and pressed her face against a gap in the chain link. The main door of Warehouse 17 stood about 80 meters ahead of her. 4 men stood in front of it now. 4, not 3. Each of them held a rifle at the ready. Each of them wore something dark over his face. One of them was smoking a cigarette with the burning ember cupped inside his palm, the way a man smokes when he does not want to be seen. A direct approach was impossible. A running child in the open would be dead before her second step. But Bianca had not come for the front door. She had come for something only she knew was here. She closed her eyes and let the page rise up behind her eyelids. The second code. The rests. The hidden sentence that had passed invisibly under the gaze of the CIA cryptographer and the Columbia professors and a mathematician whose papers nobody understood. Sewer tunnel, 80 paces west. Climb out. The battalion does not know. West of the warehouse meant somewhere along the curving edge of the abandoned service road that ran between the building and the old fuel depot. A sewer access, an old municipal tunnel, something beneath the asphalt that the 24 shooters ringing the warehouse would not have bothered to cover, because it was not on any plan they had been given. Bianca peeled back from the fence and jogged west along the outside of the chain link, counting her steps under her breath. She found it at 51 meters. A heavy cast-iron manhole cover, perhaps 80 centimeters across, set flush into a patch of broken asphalt behind a pile of rotting wooden pallets. The lip around the cover had been chipped, recently, by something sharp. Someone had pried this lid open within the last week. Someone with hands that were strong and patient and had wanted to be sure it would open again tonight. Her father's hands. Bianca dropped to her knees beside it. The cover weighed more than she did. She could not lift it. She could not even rock it. She wedged the tips of her small fingers under the chipped lip and pulled until her shoulder joint screamed. The cover shifted about an inch. She lay down on her side, braced her ragged sneakers against the pallet, and pushed with her entire body, every tendon in her 8-year-old legs straining, until the cover scraped sideways across the asphalt and opened a crescent of darkness, just wide enough for a child to fit through. A warm, foul breath rose out of the hole. The smell was appalling. Old water. Rust. Mildew. Things she did not want to name. Her stomach clenched, and she almost emptied it onto the pavement. She did not. She sat on the edge of the opening, turned onto her belly, and lowered herself down into the tunnel by the rusted iron rungs bolted into the wall of the shaft. Her feet touched a curved concrete floor about 3 meters below the street. Shallow gray water, maybe 2 inches deep, flowed around her ankles, soaking her sneakers completely. The darkness was absolute except for the pale circle of rainy sky above her. On her left wrist, she wore the cheap digital watch her grandmother had given her 2 Christmases ago, a pink plastic thing with a little blue bulb beside the face that could be pressed to light up the time. She pressed the bulb. A thin blue glow bloomed around her like a tiny lantern. She began to walk east, west, her father had written, for Anthony, for the men inside, because they were on the other side, and west for them meant out. But Bianca was outside already. Bianca was going in. She had to reverse the direction, east along the tunnel, 80 paces, to where the exit would rise into the warehouse floor like a secret mouth. She counted. Her breath shook in the damp air. Her small fingers trailed along the slick concrete wall to keep her balance. Every few steps she had to duck under pipes that sweated cold drops onto the back of her neck. Somewhere inside her head, a single question kept repeating itself like a bell that would not stop. Why would a father build a cage so cruel, and a door so gentle, in the same night? How could the hands that had designed the trap for those 12 men belong to the same man who had once taught a small girl the Hale language at a kitchen table with warm milk and a pencil held like a surgeon's scalpel? Who was she about to find at the top of this ladder? 40 paces, 50, 60. At 72 paces, her watch caught the edge of a vertical shaft in the tunnel wall. A narrow maintenance ladder climbed out of the floor and up into darkness, bolted to the concrete every half meter. At its top, perhaps 4 meters overhead, she could just make out the square seam of a trapdoor. A thin line of cold white light bled through the cracks around its edges. Bianca tucked the decoded sheet deeper into the pocket of her sweater, closed both small hands around the bottom rung, and began to climb. At the top, she pressed the back of her shoulder carefully against the underside of the trap and eased it upward by a hair's width. Light poured down across her wet face, and then a voice drifted through the opening, a voice she had not heard in 5 years. A voice that used to read her stories about little birds at bedtime, and that now, at this moment, was calmly beginning to give the order to open fire. Bianca shoved the trapdoor upward with both hands and all the strength in her soaked little body. It banged against the concrete floor with a flat metallic clang that cut through the warehouse like a gunshot. She hoisted herself up on her elbows, dragged her knees over the edge, and stood, a child in the middle of a massacre, drenched from the rain and the sewer water, sweater dripping, blonde hair plastered to the sides of a dirty face, her sneakers leaking gray puddles around her toes. Her small arms were shaking, her small shoulders were shaking, but her eyes, those huge, translucent blue eyes, did not shake at all. She looked straight across the warehouse floor at the man in the long black coat. "Papa, stop." The word hit the room harder than any weapon could have. 24 rifles on the perimeter faltered inside their firing slits. Men who had been half a breath from squeezing triggers hesitated, glancing at each other through steel plates they could not see past, waiting for an order that was not coming. Marcus Reed's mouth fell open around whatever syllable he had been about to say. Anthony, still kneeling on the concrete among his team's surrendered weapons, lifted his head very slowly. His eyes met the child's, and the recognition in them turned into something much larger than recognition. The tall figure at the base of the metal staircase went absolutely still. Victor Hale had spent 5 years preparing himself for every possible variation of this night. He had mapped out 27 contingencies. He had drilled himself against every face he thought he might encounter. He had not drilled himself against this one. He had not dared. The conductor's baton slipped out of his fingers and made a small bright clatter as it rolled across the concrete. Bianca. His voice cracked in half on the second syllable. No. No, 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 my love. You are not supposed to be here. You were never supposed to be here. You were never supposed to see this. Bianca took one step toward him, then another. Her sneakers left wet, dark footprints across the dusty floor. The rain on her face had been joined by something else now, something warmer, something that came from deep inside her 8-year-old chest and spilled out without her permission. Papa, you are alive. You have been alive this whole time, and you did not come back. You did not come back for me. I thought you burned. I thought you were gone. I cried for you every single night. I counted the days, Papa. I counted every day. 1,825 days. I counted because I thought if I kept counting, one day the number would be right and you would be there again. Victor went down onto both knees. The man who had orchestrated the imprisonment of 12 armed killers and the abduction of a Mafia princess collapsed onto a concrete floor in front of his 8-year-old daughter and pressed both hands flat against his face, and the armor he had forged out of 5 years of grief cracked open down the center in a single audible breath. Nobody in the warehouse moved. Even Marcus Reed, pistol half raised, seemed momentarily unable to remember what his own hands were for. Bianca walked the rest of the distance and stopped 3 feet from her father. She did not reach out. She did not touch him. She only stood there, so small against the tall, kneeling shape of him, and she pulled the folded paper out of the pocket of her sweater. I read the second layer, Papa. The 7 bars with the wrong rests. I read them. I know there is a tunnel under this floor. I know there is a way out. You wrote the trap with one hand, and you wrote the door with the other. You left a door, Papa. She drew a small, shaking breath. Why? If you wanted to hurt Mr. Moretti so much, why did you leave a door? And if you wanted to forgive him, why did you still build the trap? Victor lowered his hands from his face. The face underneath was the face of a man who had been holding his breath for 5 years and had finally been given permission to exhale. Because I could not stop, my love. His voice was a ruin. Because this was never only mine. 2 years ago, someone came to me. Someone who had done his own research and discovered that Victor Hale did not die in the fire after all. He found me. He offered me help. He offered me access. He offered me the schedule of Anthony Moretti's daughter. He said if I built this room with him, he would hand me my revenge on a silver plate. And he said, in the same breath, that if I ever refused him or tried to leave, he would kill you first, my Bianca, and make me watch. He knew where you lived. He knew what time you walked to the bodega. He showed me a photograph of you sleeping in a hallway one winter night. So I said yes, and I built the trap. And I buried the door inside the trap, and I prayed, every single night for 2 years, that a reader would come. Bianca's mouth trembled. Who, Papa? Who did that to you? Victor did not have to answer. Shut your mouth! Marcus Reed's voice cracked across the warehouse like a whip. The cultivated calm was gone. The sneer was gone. What remained was something small, and tight, and frightened, and furious. He had taken 3 long strides away from his allies, and now stood with his pistol leveled directly at Victor's head. The barrel wavered for a heartbeat, and then steadied. The plan is Moretti dies tonight. The plan is Moretti dies in this building, along with every man he brought with him. I sold the Moretti family to the Bellinis for $2 million, Hale. $2 million, half on delivery of the body. And I have no intention of changing a single part of the plan for some soaking wet little stray who wandered in out of the rain. Not Moretti. Not you. And not her. The pistol swung, just a few degrees, toward the child standing beside her kneeling father. And for the first time, every person still breathing in Warehouse 17 understood who had truly authored this night. Not the conductor. The dog. Marcus squeezed the trigger. He was aiming at the child. What happened next took less than a single second. But inside that second there was room for a lifetime. Victor Hale came off his knees like something released from a spring. Not toward Marcus. Not toward the door. Toward the small body standing beside him. His long black coat flared behind him in a single dark arc. His left arm swept around his daughter and pulled her into his chest. His right shoulder rotated forward to take whatever was about to arrive. The pistol bucked. The sound inside the warehouse was enormous. An overlapping roar that bounced off steel walls and came back twice. The round struck Victor high in the right shoulder, punched through the long coat, and exited out the back in a dark, ragged flower of blood that sprayed across the concrete behind him in a fine, warm arc. He did not fall. He folded his body over Bianca's and stayed standing with his arms locked around her like a small cathedral of bone and coat fabric. And for a handful of seconds, nobody in the warehouse was sure whether he was alive or dead. Then chaos cracked the room open. Frank Delgado had been crouched amid the pile of surrendered Moretti weapons, 3 feet from his boss. What Victor and Marcus had not searched for, because no one searches a man twice, was the small flat pistol Frank kept strapped to the inside of his left boot. He drew it in one motion. He came up firing. 2 rounds, deliberate, placed low. Marcus Reed's right knee exploded, then his left thigh. The traitor went down sideways with an animal scream, pistol clattering across the concrete, and lay writhing in a rapidly spreading pool of his own blood. Frank did not kill him. That had not been the choice. A dead Marcus could not answer questions. A dead Marcus could not tell the Moretti family exactly how much the Bellinis had paid, and who had counted the money, and who else had signed. Marcus, on the floor, was worth more than Marcus, in a grave. The 24 shooters behind the perimeter steel plates hesitated. They were mercenaries. They had been paid a deposit by Marcus Reed, promised a final payment by Marcus Reed, and instructed by Marcus Reed. They were not loyal to the conductor in the long coat. They were not loyal to a revenge they did not understand. They had been loyal to a paycheck, and the paycheck was now bleeding out on the concrete at the base of his own staircase. Through the speaker on the east wall, Victor Hale's voice tore free, shaking with blood loss but absolutely unmistakable. "All of you, this operation is aborted. Stand down and withdraw through the west corridor. There will be no payment for any round fired from this moment onward. If you open fire, you answer to me personally, and I swear on my wife's grave I will find each of you. Stand down. Withdraw." The firing slits went quiet. The sound that followed was the sound of 24 men, through 24 separate exit routes, quietly walking away from a fight they had never owned. Anthony Moretti was already moving. He crossed the concrete in 3 long strides, not toward Marcus, not toward his surrendered weapons, toward Victor. He caught the wounded man under the good arm, as Victor's knees finally began to give way, and he eased him down into a kneeling position, with a care that would have shocked any capo in the 5 boroughs. "Hale, Hale, look at me." Victor's eyes, already glazing, found his. "Sophia, the countdown. Tell me how to stop it." Victor's trembling left hand fumbled inside the pocket of his bloodied coat. It came back out holding a small black plastic remote, no larger than a cigarette lighter. He pressed it into Anthony's palm with the last cooperation his nervous system could offer. Green button. 1 press. The whole device disarms. She is in the basement of a row house in Staten Island, 147 Arden Avenue. She is alone in the room. There is no one guarding her. There was never going to be anyone. I could not put a stranger with a child. I never intended to hurt her, Mr. Moretti. The bomb was a clock, not a weapon. You have my word. On my daughter." Anthony's thumb pressed the green button. On the screen of the tablet lying beside them on the concrete, the red numbers froze at 47 minutes and 13 seconds, and then, with an almost polite little chime, went dark. Anthony lifted the radio off Angelo's vest and keyed a channel that had just come back to life. "Vincent, listen to me carefully. Take the second SUV. Staten Island, 147 Arden Avenue, row house, basement. Sophia is there. She is alone and she is safe. Go, right now. Call me the instant she is in your arms." Vincent was already running. Victor had begun to sag forward. A slow tremor was running through his shoulders, and the blood beneath him had widened into a pool that reached almost to Anthony's knees. Bianca, who had been pressed inside the curve of her father's arm when he took the bullet, now broke free with a small, broken cry and dropped to the concrete beside him. She seized his cold hand in both of her small, wet ones and pressed it against her cheek as hard as she could, as if by pressing hard enough she could keep him on the living side of a line he was already crossing. "Papa. Papa, no. Not now. Not now. I just got you back, Papa. I just got you back. You do not get to leave me again. You do not get to leave me again. Please, please, please stay." Anthony looked down at the child, and at her father, and at the growing red lake on the concrete. He did not hesitate. He rose to his full height, and his voice became the voice that had, for 15 years, moved every man around him without argument. "Frank, get the armored van from the second team. I want Dr. Castellanos at the Bay Ridge facility waking up right now. Call her at home. Tell her I am bringing a gunshot wound to the right shoulder. High, clean exit, significant blood loss. No hospitals, no police, no reports, no press. Ever. Tell her the patient is under my personal protection, and that anyone who asks who he is gets told he is a cousin of mine from Palermo. Move, Frank. Go." Frank moved. Anthony knelt back down on the bloody concrete beside Bianca. He placed one broad, warm hand over the small pair of hands that were clutching Victor's, and for the first time in his life, he spoke to a weeping child with the same voice a father uses. "We are not going to let him go tonight, little one. Not on my watch. I promise you." 3 hours later, the basement medical suite of the Moretti family's Bay Ridge facility had settled into the quiet that follows surgeries that go well. Dr. Elena Castellanos, the trauma surgeon who kept the family's private clinic running, peeled off her mask and gave Anthony a small, tired nod. The round passed clean through the shoulder and missed the brachial artery by the width of a pencil. "He lost 2 units before we got him on the table, but we replaced every drop. He keeps the arm." Anthony pressed an envelope into her coat pocket without a word and walked past her down the corridor. Inside the recovery room, the lights had been dimmed to a soft amber. Victor Hale lay propped at a gentle angle on a hospital bed, a thick white dressing wrapping his right shoulder, an IV line ticking into the back of his left hand. Bianca sat on the chair beside him. She had not moved in 3 hours. Mrs. Dot had arrived at some point, had scrubbed the sewer water off the child's legs, and had wrapped her in a borrowed bathrobe 3 sizes too big. The child had accepted all of it without a word. Her right hand stayed locked around her father's left hand, as if she was afraid he might dissolve the instant she let go. 2 doors down the hall, Sophia Moretti was sleeping under a quilt with her plush rabbit tucked under one arm. Vincent had found her exactly where Victor had said. She had not been harmed. She had only asked, in the small, solemn voice of a child just waking, where her father was. Anthony pushed open Victor's door with his hip. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee. He set one on the bedside table and drew a chair up slowly, the way a man approaches a horse he is not sure will let him close. Victor's eyes opened. "Have you come to finish it, Mr. Moretti?" Anthony placed the second cup into Victor's good hand. "I am going to say something to you once. Only once. Listen to the end of it before you answer." Victor nodded against the pillow. The night at Carnegie Hall. "I did not know the Bellinis were going to move that night, inside that building. I had been told they intended to hit me at the Russian tea room. I changed my plans. I went to the concert because the ticket had been in my coat pocket for weeks. When the first round was fired, I was already on my feet, pushing strangers toward the exits. I did not see your wife fall. I did not see her at all until I read the paper the next morning." He drew a slow breath. "I did not sleep for 3 nights after I read her name. I had seen death my entire life. I had caused it. But I had never caused the death of a woman I had never met, because she had chosen to sit at a piano on the evening I had chosen to hear her play." He reached inside his coat and laid a folded yellowed carbon on the sheet between them. A cashier's check copy. $200,000. Payee. The Hale family. Delivered by courier. No name. No note. 3 days after the funeral. Victor's face drained of what little color blood loss had left him. "We received that envelope." His voice was barely a whisper. "Cash. Unsigned. I thought it came from an orchestra benefit fund. I used it to pay my mother-in-law's hospital bill. The stroke took her 2 days after Elena died. It was not compensation," Anthony said quietly. "Nothing compensates a life. It was only what I could manage, in the only way I knew." The room fell long and full. Bianca's small hand tightened around her father's. Victor's eyes, at last, filled with the tears that had been frozen inside him for 5 unbroken years. He let them run. "Mr. Moretti, for 5 years I have been a monster, hating a man who had already tried, in the only way he knew how, to help the family he had accidentally broken. I built a warehouse to kill him. I put my own daughter through 5 winters of hunger to buy myself the right to pull that trigger. I was wrong. In every direction, I was wrong." He closed his eyes. "Forgive me, Moretti. Truly." Morning arrived over Brooklyn without a single siren. No police report was filed. No hospital log was created. No journalist picked up a whisper of the events at Warehouse 17, because the warehouse had been sanitized by a specialty crew before dawn, and because this world handled its own affairs behind its own doors. Frank Delgado personally supervised the removal of every shell casing, every trace of blood, every scorched fragment of the claymores that had never detonated. Marcus Reed was transported, still alive, to a facility in the Poconos that did not appear on any map. What was asked of him there, and what he gave in answer, and what became of him afterward, would not be spoken of inside Bianca's hearing, not that morning, and not ever. The Bellini family, it turned out, had been shopping for the Moretti throne for almost 2 years. The $2 million payment to Marcus had been only the first installment of an agreement that involved territories, warehouses, and a vacant seat at the Waterfront Commission. Anthony read the documents Frank laid on his desk just after 6 in the morning, and he understood that an entirely new war was about to begin. That war, however, would belong to later chapters of his life. This morning belonged to something else. Sophia woke just after 7, in a small guest bedroom down the hall from her father's operating theater. She opened her eyes, saw Anthony sitting in an armchair pulled against her bed, and before she said any word at all, she launched herself across the bedspread and locked both small arms around his neck with the kind of ferocious, simple grip that only a 7-year-old can manage. Anthony Moretti, who had not wept at his own father's funeral, who had not wept when Isabella had slipped away in that orchid-filled room 3 years ago, who had not wept for 20 years of his adult life, wept now. He wept without hiding it, in front of Frank, in front of the nurse, in front of the child in his arms. Tears dropped onto her dark curls and disappeared into them. When he had composed himself enough to speak, he carried her down the corridor in both arms. At the doorway of Victor's room, he set her gently down on her feet. Sophia looked up at the small figure still seated beside Victor's bed, a girl about her own height, a girl in a bathrobe 3 sizes too large, a girl with tangled blonde hair that someone had attempted, and failed, to braid an hour earlier. "Are you the one who saved me?" Sophia asked in the serious voice small children use. Bianca blushed so hard the freckles across her nose almost disappeared. She nodded. Sophia reached behind her own neck, unclasped the delicate silver chain she had been wearing under her pajamas, and held it out across the space between them. The pendant was a small silver treble clef, no larger than a thumbnail, set with a single chip of blue stone at its heart. "My mother gave me this," she said. "It was the last thing she gave me before she went to the hospital. It is the only thing I have from her. You should have it. I do not have anything else to give you." Bianca's hand came up without her permission. The chain slid from Sophia's palm into hers. Anthony lowered himself onto one knee on the tile floor so his face was level with Bianca's. "Little one, there is no ledger in this world that is long enough to account for what you did last night, so I am not going to try to settle it. I am going to offer you only what I can. You, your grandmother, and your father are moving into a proper home at the end of this week. The brownstone is already being prepared. You will be enrolled in the best school in Manhattan for the spring term. There will be a piano in your living room. Your grandmother will have the finest doctor in the borough visiting her twice a week. Your father will never have to hide again, anywhere, for any reason. I will personally guarantee that with every resource I have." Bianca shifted her weight. Her free hand tightened around the little treble clef. "Mr. Moretti, thank you. But I do not need all of that. I only need my papa." Anthony smiled. It was the first true smile to cross his face since Isabella had closed her eyes in a room full of orchids 3 years ago. "You already have your papa, little one, and, if you will allow it, you also have an uncle." From the bed, Victor watched the exchange through the soft fog of painkillers and exhaustion. His good hand found Bianca's and squeezed it once. Something that had been locked inside his chest for 5 years quietly unlocked. He did not have a word for what replaced it. He only knew that, for the first time in those 5 years, he was breathing without carrying a coffin on his shoulders. An hour later, the armored van pulled up at the service entrance. Mrs. Dot stepped out first, then helped down a small, frail woman with white hair pulled into a neat bun, a wheelchair folded behind her, and 2 canes braced against a thin frame that had not been outside her apartment building in more than a year. Bianca's grandmother, Rose, had been told almost nothing on the ride over. Only that her granddaughter was safe. Only that there was someone at the facility she needed to see. Bianca met her in the corridor and wordlessly took her hand and led her toward Victor's room. Rose had stopped believing her son-in-law was alive 5 years ago. She had buried an empty coffin beside her daughter's. She had said the prayers herself. When she stepped through the doorway and saw the man propped against the pillows, her canes fell from her hands. She cried out something in Polish that nobody else in the room understood. She stumbled forward and dropped onto the edge of the bed, and took Victor's face in both of her trembling old hands and pressed her forehead against his. And the sound that came out of her was not a word, and not a sob, but something older than both. The Hale family, after 5 long winters of pretending to be only 2, quietly became 3 again. 6 months later, spring came to Brooklyn. The maples along 7th Avenue and Park Slope unfolded their first green, and the brownstones along the block wore window boxes again. On one of those brownstones, a small brass plate had been screwed to the doorframe 2 months earlier. It read, in neat engraved letters, "The Hale family." Anthony Moretti had bought that house himself, through a quiet trust that nobody could trace. 3 floors, a small garden in the back, a front parlor with high windows that caught the afternoon light. He had not asked Victor whether he would accept it. He had handed Victor a set of keys inside a plain envelope, and he had said only one sentence. A promise made on a concrete floor is a promise that has to become an address. On this particular Saturday morning, Bianca came down the front steps in the navy blue blazer and pleated skirt of St. Anne's, her hair in 2 careful braids that Victor had learned to weave during the 2nd week of the spring term. She had filled out a little. Her cheeks had color in them that they had not carried in any of the 5 winters before. The silver treble clef Sophia had given her hung at her throat over the crisp white collar of her uniform shirt. Victor walked beside her toward the corner. His right arm had healed cleanly. The scar beneath the sleeve of his cardigan had become a thin white line that he no longer thought about. 2 afternoons a week, he taught piano to neighborhood children in the front parlor, charging a nominal fee that he refused to raise. Some of his students could not yet tie their own shoes. All of them called him Mr. Hale. At the window behind them, Grandmother Rose sat in a wooden rocking chair with a half-finished sweater growing in her lap and a cup of weak tea beside her elbow. Her color had returned. Her hands no longer shook when she held a needle. The doctor from the Moretti network visited twice a week and stayed long enough to have coffee. Every Saturday at 4, a long black Cadillac eased to the curb in front of the house. Anthony Moretti stepped out of the back seat in a charcoal coat, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls and a gap where 2 baby teeth had once been. Sophia was already sprinting up the stoop before her father could close the car door. She and Bianca, in the 6 months since the warehouse, had become the kind of best friends who invented their own games and their own vocabulary, and who could not remember a time when they had lived without each other. The 2 children tumbled into the front parlor, shrieking with laughter over something neither of their fathers was old enough to understand. Anthony took up his usual place beside Victor on the small porch. A cut-glass tumbler was already waiting on the banister. 2 fingers of whiskey, no ice. They drank in silence for a while. "You have been kinder than I expected, Anthony." Anthony shook his head once. "Do not mistake what you are seeing, Victor. I am still who I am. I still give orders that do not end well for certain people. I still protect an empire that was not built by saints. I am not a good man. I am only trying to be a slightly smaller kind of bad one. That is all I can promise." Victor nodded. It was enough. There was, however, one small thing the neighborhood did not know. 6 months earlier, Anthony had issued a single standing order to every captain under his name. No operation, no retribution, no meeting, no exchange of any kind would ever again take place inside a concert hall, a theater, a recital space, or any room in New York City where people had gathered to listen to music. An unwritten rule, permanent, non-negotiable. Through the parlor window, the sound of the upright piano drifted out into the spring air. Bianca was seated at the bench, patiently showing Sophia how a treble clef could become the letter M if you knew how to look at it sideways. Sophia's brow was furrowed in concentration. Then she made a small triumphant sound and her face broke open into a grin. Anthony watched her for a long moment through the glass. Then he said very quietly, without looking at Victor, "That little girl saved my daughter's life, and I think she has been quietly saving my soul too." Inside the parlor, Bianca felt a pull at the back of her neck, the way children feel when they are being watched by someone who loves them. She looked up through the window, found her father's eyes, found Anthony's eyes beside his, and smiled. Her small hands returned to the keys. She played, from memory, the first 11 measures her mother had ever played at Carnegie Hall on the last night of Elena Hale's life. The same 11 measures of Debussy, soft and warm and unhurried. This time there were no gunshots in the hall, only music. There is a lesson folded into this story, and it belongs as much to the people watching at home as it does to any character inside it. Revenge is the easiest emotion in the world to build a cage around, and the hardest one to walk back out of. The people who hurt us are almost never standing where we think they are standing. The people who save us are almost never the ones we expect to save us. A small girl with an empty stomach can see a truth that 12 experts in suits cannot. Kindness, offered quietly in envelopes with no name on them, returns in ways nobody can predict. And forgiveness, even offered 5 years late, even offered across a pool of blood on a concrete floor, is never too late to change the shape of a life. If this story moved you in any small way, please take one moment to tap the like button, to subscribe to the channel, and to share this video with someone who might need to hear a story about second chances tonight. What did you feel while watching Bianca climb that ladder? Have you ever received a kindness from a stranger that you only understood years later? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and forgiveness? And which one did you choose? Leave a comment below with the name of the city you are watching from, and one sentence about your own experience. We read every single comment, and we learn from each of you. To everyone listening tonight, wherever in the world you happen to be, we wish you strong health, a gentle home, work that has meaning in it, and days filled with quiet joy. Take care of the small people in your life. They are often the ones carrying the largest hearts. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next story.